Yes, it's my good.
Oh, yeah, yes.
I'm very.
Yeah. That's the only thing.
Get here.
Probably get that.
We could Detroit. Drops down. They're just like, no, we're not coming.
Are you from here?
I am from Cincinnati.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a good report.
What I represent,
I
they
did
just
say,
said.
Good, thank you.
You would be astonished by the line process up there. So you probably see that.
So my,
And that's all that.
my mother, and father born and raised.
When I say.
So right across the river.
I used, they did.
It would come for the summer. Essentially, my brain.
Mission, you have control.
Okay. And,
Testimony.
after she would take us to the all you can eat mutton buffet.
How do you compare that?
They love their mutton. She would even pack us with cans of mutton to go back home to Boris at times.
And the media didn't get
Yeah,
This didn't work.
nothing better. Barbecue, all you can eat. And so, but he used to go on the banks of the Ohio and watch the Miss Budweiser boat race. Now, that was big. Right now.
Oh, I'm down. Secretary in the laptop. Yeah, I was, they did that through something. Yeah, you doing okay?
So I'm thinking.
No, oh, I can't come in. Actually.
Yeah. I heard that. I'm like, you're in the.
Hopefully, you know, hopefully this would be a good environment.
Well, my children. Oh, my God. I'm trying to.
That's good. Awesome.
He might come like all 5 of my work.
Yeah.
Okay,
Very nice.
I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Nuclear Indiana Coalition meeting. Thank you so much for being here. Those of you who are here online and those of you who are here in person, thank you so much. This is the Governor's Executive Order 2548. The Nuclear Indiana Coalition. I'm Secretary of Energy Susie Jaworski, Secretary of Energy and Natural Resources for the state of Indiana. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting. And what we'll do is go ahead and we'll do an attendance, ask everybody to introduce themselves and who they're here on behalf of as part of the coalition. And so welcome, and we'll start down, actually, Mallory, I'll ask you to introduce yourself, and we'll start at that end of the table and then go around, so if you could go ahead and get
Okay.
started.
Hi, I'm Mallory Temple. You caught me as I was standing up, so don't feel like you also have to stand up to introduce yourself. I am Secretary's assistant.
Thank you.
I'm Becca Gillespie from Energy Systems.
Thank you very much, Becca, for being here. And I want to just mention, we do have several people joining online. There are a lot of folks that couldn't make it here because of impending weather coming from Fort Wayne or Lafayette. And so just make sure to speak up so everybody online can hear us clearly.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Wood. I'm Director of Indiana Homeland Security.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Ed McGinnis, President and CEO of Curio. You'll hear a little bit about that, so I won't describe it right now.
Thanks, Ed.
I am Mark Flint. I'm representing First American Nuclear, Banco.
Ronaldo Hunt, representing Purdue Applied Research Institute, for the legal, as a state representative or someone with government. Thank you.
Luke Wilson, Chief Policy Officer for the Indiana Office of Energy Development.
Andrew Pappas, Deputy Assistant Commissioner with IDEM on behalf of Commissioner Flint Woods.
Brian Bergsman with Indiana Michigan Power, and we're an American Electric.
Anthony Swinger, I'm here on behalf of Abby Gray, Utility Consumer Counselor.
Andrew Baker, Vice President, Government Relations for Rolls-Royce.
Melanie Rainey, M&A for AES US Utilities, and I'm here representing AES Indiana. I'm Holly Mitchell with Steel Dynamics.
Thank you, Holly. I should also mention,
Jim Houston, I'm Chair of the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, and I'm sorry I was late and I'm having to leave early, so that's why I'm back here.
thank you so much, Chairman. Also want to thank the chairman. This may be his last meeting being here. Our chairman is going to be retiring in January, and so I want to publicly thank him for his dedicated years of service at the Utility Regulatory Commission. Jim Houston is extremely recognized, respected across the state of Indiana and across the country as a regulator in the utility space. But also anybody in Indiana knows that he's made his career as a public servant, serving the state of Indiana for many governors. And he's got many friends here and has done an outstanding job of serving Hoosiers. And I want to thank you, Jim. And I hope that you'll continue to be a close friend and advisor to me, even when you're not showing up here in Indianapolis every day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, we have Stephanie Flitner here. She is General Counsel for the Department of Natural Resources. And Jet, do you want to introduce yourself?
Governor's Fellow here on behalf of the Office of Energy Development.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to turn things around a little bit before I review the executive order. I'd like to mention our annual report. As part of the executive order for the Nuclear Indiana Coalition, every year we have to produce a report on what took place for the coalition. And we only had one meeting this year, so the coalition itself hasn't done a whole lot, but there is a lot happening in the nuclear energy industry. And Indiana, our goal is to lead and be a leading state in that realm, not just on deploying nuclear energy in the state, but also inviting the development of manufacturing and the supply chain for bringing the United States back to be a leader in the world and letting our state be a leader in the country on that. And so this report reflects what's happening in terms of what's happening in the country and what's been happening in the state. And so I'd like to ask Jet to give us an executive summary, a little bit of an overview on that.
Oh, you pointed at this.
Seem to be working here. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for joining today. Like I said, my name is Jeff Brownlee, one of the governor's fellows here for the state of Indiana, and also one of the contributors to this report. So today I'll just be providing you with a brief summary of what that report details. So first of all, what are the objectives of the report? So Governor Braun's Executive Order 2548. So this executive order directs the Nuclear Indiana Coalition to advance practical, affordable, and reliable pathways for nuclear development. Well, we've only had one meeting this year, so we decided to include a lot of other steps that have been taken within the state of Indiana and also federally. So this report summarizes the progress that has been made at both the federal and state level towards achieving the objectives outlined in this executive order. So first, in our report, we cover executive or federal level orders, right? So we have the Trump administration. He signed into order 3 landmark executive orders, which in one way or another work towards streamlining permitting permitting and regulatory processes, securing the national supply chain, so primarily uranium production, emphasize nuclear's role in ensuring national security, then also shifted some responsibilities for test reactors over to the DOE away from the National Nuclear Regulatory Commission, so the NRC. So outside of these executive orders, we also had some actions from the DOE, right? So they launched their fuel line pilot program, which, going back to that executive order, securing national supply chains for uranium production was a top priority from the federal government this year. The DOE's fuel line pilot program aims to do this by accelerating the build out of domestic nuclear fuel production lines. Additionally, the DOE launched their reactor pilot program, which is currently seeking applicants. And again, going back to those executive orders, shifting some of those responsibilities over to the DOE, we can see them doing just this with their launch of this pilot program here. Some other federal and national achievements that took place this year. So federal law and appropriations unlocked around $2.72 billion to expand domestic HALO fuel production. So HALO is high assay, low enriched uranium. So this is a type of fuel that is commonly used in next generation reactors, so those Gen 3 plus reactors. Additionally, the federal government also opened up some new pathways for funding and tax credits. So $150 million in Title 17 credit subsidies for advanced reactors and SMRs. The DOE proposed an energy dominance loan program network framework. And then also the One Big Beautiful Bill revised some clean energy tax provisions. Additionally, we heard a lot about the United States government's groundbreaking partnership with Westinghouse Electric Company. So this paves the way for the United States to support at least $80 billion of new reactor construction across the United States. And they're looking for current sites for those reactors right now. So we'll go over here, statewide achievements. So this is what happened in Indiana this year. First of all, we had Governor Braun's Executive Order 2548. That's what created this coalition here. So this identifies federal programs. The order or the role of this commission is to identify programs that reduce deployment costs, identify and address regulatory constraints and permitting, streamline permitting processes, among various other things. Additionally, the Indiana took a co-chair role in the National Association of State Energy Officials, or NASIO's, First Mover Initiative. So this First Movers Initiative is aimed at developing a multi-state order book. So that's one of their objectives, but also creating or adopting new policies for nuclear development. So in addition to that, we also had the Indiana General Assembly pass 3 landmark bills here. So we have House Enrolled Act 1007. So what this does is it creates a 20% state credit for expenses incurred during nuclear reactor development that happens in the United States, or construction that happens in, sorry, not the United States, but Indiana. primarily. And it also outlines that large load customers are required to reimburse utilities for up to 80% of costs attributable to serving those large load users. So it protects ratepayers as well. One thing that bill also does, it defines SMRs of having no more than 470 megawatts of generating nameplate capacity. We also saw Senate Enrolled Act 423. So this develops a partnership pilot program allowing for the development of 2 SMRs across Indiana. And then also Senate Enrolled Act 424 outlining some of the cost recovery for SMR construction in Indiana. Some other achievements that we saw throughout Indiana, we saw the Nuclear Planning Retreat, which was a collaboration between the National Governors Association and NASIO. And then we also saw the IBJ Nuclear Energy Forum. In addition, the Purdue Global Nuclear Energy Summit. FANCO announced their nuclear energy park, which is going to be built here in Indiana. AES launched their SMR feasibility study. And then I&M Power is taking steps towards their NRC early site permitting process. So, in addition, included in this report are some recommendations for the Nuclear Indiana Coalition. So, improving Indiana's federal coordination with the DOE and NRC, streamlining some regulatory and permitting processes by more closely working with the NRC on efficient licensing, and also pursuing state primacy where applicable, exploring some relevant public-private partnerships, and facilitating utility developer and consumer collaborations under SEA 423. We also recommended the continuation of education outreach programs that address community concerns about nuclear safety and also workforce development across Indiana. Evaluate some opportunities to streamline or clarify state roles, responsibilities for environmental feasibility and permitting requirements, including addressing some of the outdated provisions in Indiana Code 1315. And then also leveraging the Hoosier manufacturing base to secure national supply chains by attracting nuclear manufacturing to the state of Indiana. And that kind of concludes my short little summary. I want to thank everybody who quickly reviewed the paper. We've been working hard at it, the OED, so it's been trying to turn it around for everyone here to see.
Thank you very much, Jet. Nice job.
Thank you.
Does anybody in the room have any questions or comments? Please, Brian.
Just one clarification. I believe Senate Enrolled Act 423 does not have a cap on the number of pilots. Just as an FYI. I think that's in the report. It's called a pilot, but it does not have caps.
Okay. So let's make that edit. Okay.
Yeah, there are no caps. It's a pilot, but there are no caps. So it's really a program.
Okay. 423?
Yes.
All right, we'll make that change. Any other comments?
Yeah, one other one that I wanted to bring up from Chairman Houston, just on that same page 7. It's the credit, when we're defining what an SMR is, it says, let's see, line 9 or 10, has a nameplate capacity of at least 470 megawatts, changing at least to under.
That's been
So
changed.
you caught it on the,
Up to.
up to 470. You caught it on the presentation, but I just want to make sure it's on still.
Thank you very much. Even Ronaldo, do you want to mention your?
Sure. On number 8, just carry through on. Give me one moment.
It's page 8 on the report or slide 8?
On the report. Okay, let's see, page 5 just says identify, at the bottom, it says Executive Order 2540 directs the Nuclear Indiana Coalition to identify federal programs that reduce deployment costs. I just wanted to make a small change, or at least indicate in recommendation number 8 that essentially enhancing the supply chain within Indiana or Hoosiers will also be part and parcel with helping to reduce or streamline, we use optimized costs of SMR deployments. That's it, because I think that is important, and if we do enhance our supply chain in the state, we'll be a big contributor to that.
Okay. All right, online, are there any other comments or edits online for our online participants?
Yeah, this is Ryan Heater. There was a couple I might mention just for some additional clarification on page 7 when it's talking about House Bill 1007. It indicates that on the 80% threshold that it's required that large load customers cover 80% of the cost. I think we want to clarify that that's an option, or it's 80% if that generation is brought online through the fast track process at the CPCN at the IORC.
Thank you, Ryan. That's a good clarification.
Yeah, and then related to that clarification, I think on page 8 in the main, it's the same thing. There's some language in there. It's the paragraph that starts with Indiana's nuclear strategy has generated strong support. Later in that paragraph, it talks about, it's near the bottom of that paragraph, requiring large new loads to bear most of the incremental infrastructure costs. I think we want to match that language to what's actually in 1007.
Did you get that?
Yes.
Okay.
And to tag team on what Ryan was just saying about House Bill like 1007, I don't know if we want to clarify, I wasn't going to say anything. You technically don't have to follow that path.
Yeah.
An option
Yeah.
to follow them. So I don't know if
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah,
if that
thanks,
was
Brian.
what you were clarifying. We have a different tariff in place. So I wasn't going to say anything because that's getting way below the weeds. So.
Okay. And then if I had one other point I might make, I'll throw it out there, is on page 7, the start of the last paragraph. This is more of maybe from a utility perspective where it says these policy changes respond to concrete load forecasts. I would maybe want to strike the word concrete and reformat that sentence, because I don't, when you're talking about forecasts, that's what they are. They're forecasts for the future, and using the word concrete may over solidify what we may see in the future.
All right, well, thank you.
So I'll have one more, and this may be adding too much to it. Luke can tell me if this is adding too much. We are mentioning Senate Rule Act 425 that actually provided SMR siting. So I don't know if, and that was kind of we're ahead of a lot of other states in terms of the siting of SMRs. It does allow. So I don't know if there's a way to have like 1 or 2 sentences. It's a pretty easy bill to explain, but it's, in terms of the package, it kind of finishes off the full package of the SMR bills.
Get on that.
Thank you. Ryan, anything else?
No, I think that's primarily that all I had. Thank you for indulging me.
No worries. Thank you for reading it so carefully. Appreciate it. Anyone else online? Okay, any other questions, comments, or suggestions? Okay, well, by code, we do have to vote on this as a committee. And so what I'd like to do is have everyone, okay, is this language?
Make sure that when you're voting virtually, the same.
Okay. Oh, all right. So the fact that we have some folks online and some in person, we'll have to make sure that when you're voting virtually, you must announce your name and how you vote. For example, you say, I'm Susie Jaworowski and I'm voting yes in favor of submitting this report to the governor. And so we'll go ahead and have the members in the room vote. And what we're voting on is whether we agree with sending this report with these changes being made to submit it to the governor. So we'll start with you, Becca.
Yes. Okay, and one clarification, the members in the room also do need to say their name and their specific stance.
Thank you very much.
Jonathan Whittam votes yes. Mark Flint votes yes.
On behalf
On
of,
behalf of FANCO.
thank you.
Ronaldo Hunt votes yes.
Luke Wilson on behalf of John Ford votes yes.
Andrew Pappas on behalf of Commissioner Clint Woods votes yes.
Brian Bergson on behalf of Indiana Michigan Power votes yes.
Anthony Swinger on behalf of Consumer Counselor Abby Gray votes yes.
Andrew Baker from Rolls-Royce votes yes.
Rainey from AES votes yes. Holly Mitchell from Steel Dynamics votes yes.
Dave Houston from IRC votes yes.
Thank you. Online participants, Mallory, do you want to choose them one by one, please?
Dr. Kim,
Susan Kim voting yes.
Donna Walker,
Anna Walker voting yes.
Ryan Heater,
Ryan Heater voting yes.
and those were all of our online participants.
Okay, thank you. And Secretary Jaworowski also voting yes. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to John Ford and Jet and all those who worked on this report at the Office of Energy Development. Very well done. Thank you. All right, our next area of business is to have a guest who came in from Washington, D.C. today. Ed McGinnis is the president and CEO of Curio. Curio is an amazing company. We're very fortunate to have them in the United States, and we're very fortunate to have them come to Indiana and to be a friend of the state. Their company is born of the mission to help eliminate the spent or slightly used fuel, as we like to say, in the nuclear industry. And that mission came from the Rabbi
Moskowitz and his brother, yes.
Rabbi Moskowitz and his brother, and they started the company with that dream to be able to take care of the problem of spent fuel. And they have put that issue into technology that's now in the United States Science Labs, being developed and being made a reality. And Ed McGinnis is here to talk about his company, what their vision and how it's come to be a reality, and their quest to partner with states and what's happening at the very highest levels of the U.S. federal government, and how Indiana could perhaps partner with a company like Curio and the United States government, and we'll see the very latest technology and what's happening there. So Ed, welcome. Thank you so much for coming and being a friend of the state.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Very much so. First of all, I appreciate your kind words in describing some of the background. I'll go a little bit more in detail. First of all, our company is a fully vertically and horizontally integrated company from the standpoint of nuclear tech deployment and services. Whether it's from reactor development, we have an advanced small modular reactor and a micro reactor under development, all the way back, all the way across the spectrum to waste disposition, used nuclear fuel management, commodity extraction of that, waste reduction, waste volume reduction of that used nuclear fuel, SUNF. Now, I think it's starting to catch on. You'll hear more and more people rightfully say it really is slightly used nuclear fuel. So we really are a company that's fairly unique, where we're seeking to get into the U.S. nuclear market and globally with the entire loaf of bread. We can go to the CEO and say, we have a reactor to sell that's affordable, competitive, and we're going to bring the fuel and not have you brave that challenging nuclear fuel market, especially if you need HALEU. And that's a dominant position by Russia right now, and we're scrambling to get HALEU produced. And also manage your fuel and take care of the waste. We have been working on our flagship technology, our backbone technology, which is our recycling technology. We're entering into the market not through reactors, but through the back end. And the back end desperately needs to be established in this country. If we're going to quadruple or even stabilize our nuclear fleet from exiting, we have got to take care of the nuclear waste problem. We need to have a fully functioning back end of the fuel cycle in combination with the front end. So this is our target. Our target is all, or as much of the 92,000 metric tons that we can put in agreements with. We have designed, and I'll go through this real quickly, our recycling technology to do a number of things. One is to have as high of a throughput as possible. Why? One reason, we have the largest fleet of nuclear reactors in the world still today. China's hot on our heels, but we still do. That means we have the largest amount of slightly used nuclear fuel that's been sidelined going back to Carter because of international security reasons, not because there's somehow no technical means to reuse the material, recycle it, not because there's not value in that used nuclear fuel. So right now we have about 92,000 metric tons co-located next to a nuclear reactor, some already shut down, sitting there with a fence around it, nowhere to go because the federal government failed to pick up that material starting in 1998, but not before they were successful in amassing now what is about a $50 billion nuclear waste fund that was taken in order to pay the services for the federal government to take the material away, which they have not done. And there's no solution anywhere in the near future for Yucca Mountain. And as we've heard from Jet, that this president has now put in place an executive order directing Wright and Hegseth to come up with a plan to fully utilize that used nuclear fuel, both the government material and the commercial material. That plan is under development and it's nearly done. The administration, I would say, is not waiting for those executive orders or that plan. They're moving out. Case in point, Westinghouse with the $80 billion deal. There are deals being done now. General Matters for enrichment, Oklo for smaller scale recycling. We're partnering with them in the process. So that's our target. So what is in this material? Most of you know, but some may not be aware that when the fuel is typically fresh fuel after it's mined, after it's converted into fuel pellets, and after it's put in a reactor and it runs for about 5 years, it's pulled out and not used again, sitting on those pads. When it runs for about 5 years, you've only used about 4% of the energy value. There are scientists at Idaho National Labs that have publicly, Wall Street Journal and other publications, have said that they believe there's enough energy value still resident in that slightly used nuclear fuel to meet the U.S. electricity needs for at least 100 years. This is $1 trillion asset we're sitting on, but because of government policies and other reasons, we have chosen in the past not to use that material in a full utilization way. So it's not just in that material. You still have 96% of the energy value left to turn it back into fuel, uranium-based fuel. And in our case, we're going to be extracting plutonium as well as a plutonium-based fuel. But you have other isotopes and precious metals that are generated during that 5-year fissioning process. So during that 5-year fissioning process, you've got highly valuable isotopes that have been produced and that we plan to mine. We're a mining operation essentially and a waste volume reduction company. You've got krypton-85. That is the isotope used by the Navy to detect leaks in reactor pressure vessels. Who's the supplier of that? One. It's Russia. It's a problem. We've got plenty of krypton-85, all that's needed for the Navy mission and other medical applications for krypton-85, medical imaging, right sitting in these 80 locations around the country. We've got americium-241. That's in high demand. The plutonium-based sources for space, too expensive, too limited in supply. So we're talking to DARPA, we're talking to others. Large quantities, strontium-90, nano diamond battery companies, other tech innovation companies planning to use strontium-90. They can't get it. They can't get the quantities and volumes. We have very large quantities of strontium-90 in our slightly used nuclear fuel. We have offtake agreements and indicators priced out to the market. Just as soon as we pull it off, we're selling it in the market. We have customers. Eckert & Ziegler is the largest radioisotope manufacturing company in the world out of Germany, large presence in the US. We have offtake agreements with them. You have other isotopes. We're even planning to pull out xenon, planning to pull out tritium. And we know how to do it. In fact, we have just completed a 3-year lab scale demonstration of our recycling tech, which is a state of the art of an entirely new generation beyond the Purex process that is used around the world today in Russia, Japan, France, China, which is a very arcane process, and it has environmental safety challenges. It's got security challenges, and we've eliminated those challenges in our new design, and I'll describe in a minute. So here's our process. What we've done, here's the benefit of being a bold, brash, ambitious startup company, going after a market that is dominated by large state-owned, uniquely large state-owned companies, whether it's La Hague in France, $20+ billion sunk investment. It's really more of a small city that they have, rather than just a facility. They cannot justify pivoting away from their old Purex process to something like what we're doing. We have an advantage. We can start from a clean slate and build in the latest and greatest modularity, autonomy, compactness, and most important are the 3 key reasons why I would say we have not been recycling in this country. One is the process that's being used today around the world is an environmental challenge. They use nitric acid to dissolve the fuel assemblies to then get at just a few of the isotopes, uranium and plutonium. When they do that, they actually create more waste than they started with. So that's a problem. So what did we do? We eliminated the use of nitric acid because one of our priorities is to be environmentally sustainable and get the maximum waste volume reduction achieved. So we use a pyro process, and it's a largely dry process, non-aqueous process. So with that process and a 3-stage flow sheet recycling process, we start with the deox process where we put full fuel assemblies in, and we achieve a full separation of the zirconium cladding from the fuel pellets with no manipulation, no chopping, just a superheated process and a deox process. You get the pulverized fuel. We're pulling out Krypton 85 and others during that process, like that mining operation I was saying. Second unit of operations, a fluorination process, and that's how we're able to then extract uranium for reused fuel, repurpose, and we're extracting it in a gas form. It's important. That means it's going to be extracted enrichment ready form. Our facility is going to be the highest throughput facility on the planet, 4,000 metric tons. In fact, it represents more recycling capacity, it will, than all of the recycling capacity around the world in Russia, Japan, France, China. So, but again, scale, it makes sense. We have the largest fleet in the world. That means we have the largest amount of slightly used nuclear fuel waiting to be harvested, waiting to be recycled. So that second stage, pulling out the uranium, we will be able to provide about 1/3 of the entire U.S. annual uranium fuel feedstock requirements. We already have a partnership with Orano, which is building an enrichment plant, $7 billion plant in Tennessee. The plan is up for us to provide them with that feedstock to then sell that fuel to all the types of light water reactors out there. And then finally, the electrolysis process is our 3rd stage, and that's where we will then isolate the remaining amount of high-level radioactive waste material that is legally required to be deeply geologically disposed of per federal law, Nuclear Waste Policy Act, from the remaining valuable products such as plutonium. We're going to pull the plutonium out, but not in a pure stream, which is the second challenge of the current process of Purex, which is Purex, its name. They pull out a pure stream of plutonium. That is really incredibly problematic in the US and what led Carter to put a moratorium on recycling at the time and reprocessing. We've eliminated that. We do not ever have a pure stream of plutonium. We build in safeguard and security by design. So we de-risk from a company perspective to major opposing forces. Environmental, by generating more waste than you started with a Purex. Now we're going to be able to get it down to only about 3 to 4% of the waste that has to be deeply geologically disposed of. Suddenly, we can do that. Our entire nation's 3 to 4% can be disposed of in simply 4 to 8 boreholes, standard 12-inch diameter boreholes. You can go 15,000 feet in the ground. There's no more value in the material. Put it down there, you're done. So that's another next generation solution we have brought to the table. The third problem are the economics. State-owned, just a couple of commodities extracted, spending money dealing with the additional waste. Since we have so much less waste to deal with, and we're taking so many different commodities. In fact, I didn't mention that in addition to the radioisotopes, most people don't realize during this fissioning process, 2 of the most expensive metals in the world are generated in large quantities. One is rhodium, the most expensive metal in the world in the market terms today. That's why you see catalytic converters being stolen. Very, very small microscopic amount of rhodium is in there. We will be able to provide 10% of the world's rhodium just from this 4,000 metric ton facility. So we're going to literally have 11 revenue streams from this one facility. If the uranium price tanks one day, it's a pinprick to my portfolio. If we have trouble selling strontium-90, we're okay still. We're diversified, de-risked to be an economic powerhouse. So those are the key things that distinguish us. We just completed, after 3 years partnering with 4 national labs at the Department of Energy, our lab scale demonstration. We're no longer in the research and development stage. We're now scaling. We're working very closely with NEDC, the National Energy Dominance Council, the Department of Energy, NNSA, others in the interagency. We have 9 different government contracts with the Department of Energy and 1 with the Department of Defense already. And so now we're in a scale-up phase because of the executive orders. Jet mentioned those. One of them calling for getting our back end fully functioning, recycling, government and commercial. We already have a plan to have our first recycling capability up and running in 3 years under this president's watch, likely at Idaho National Lab. Concurrently, and this is very important for Indiana and the states, concurrently, we're partnering with the USG to commercially deploy our 4,000 metric ton state-of-the-art facility. And we plan to have that done probably less than 2035. In fact, with the executive order, with a review of what we've done and a rallying of different resources, we project we can have this full commercial facility up and running by 2032. So the White House, the Department of Energy, they're excited about this. So here's something that's very, very unique, I would say, in the back end of the fuel cycle, as opposed to the front end of reactors. Nuclear reactors provide great generational jobs, but if you look at a reactor, what, on average, maybe 600, 800 full-time jobs, highly paid, well-skilled, combination of trades and advanced education. Recycling is much more jobs intensive. The French, La Hague, they're about 7,000 to 8,000 full-time people. Our facility, more advanced, more compact, more autonomy. We project we are going to have a full-time continuous workforce of about 3,400 individuals. And the beauty is these are very jobs accessible for communities. I mean that by saying that the majority of these employees are going to be trades-based. These are individuals, high school diploma, 2-year associates, but highly trained. We're going to train them up very well. And what you get is some of the highest average generational jobs in the country in the trades-based area. We're proud of that. We're stakeholder-based. Wherever we plan our state, we get it. This is not just us owning a company and building it. This is a partnership with the community and with the state, and the state and the communities are just as much stewards and owners, in our view, as we are. So this is not just direct. We expect about the same number, 3,000 to 4,000 for downstream. Because remember, with our recycling facility, being that commodity mining, extraction, pulling up medical and industrial space-based fuel, we're going to have a tech corridor effect. We're going to have companies, those companies we have offtake agreements with now, many of them will want to co-locate next to our facility, like medical, where the isotopes very short half-lives, and they want to get that the isotopes and get them to the hospital or wherever as quickly as possible. So you're going to have a co-location and downstream effect from an economic perspective as well. And for the economics, I'm as excited about the jobs as I am about the economics. I'm very proud that wherever we build, we project we're going to be able to provide as much as $400 million annually with a fully operating 4,000 metric ton facility going back to the state and local community. And that does not include any federal resources, some of which have already been collected and available for disposition activities. And I'll mention a couple of things that could be a major game changer happening under the Trump administration. And lastly, when you're talking about bringing in nuclear reactors in the state, then the big question is, okay, what are you going to do with that fuel, the slightly used nuclear fuel, which albeit is at a highly radioactive state when you pull it out after that 5 years of first run? Part of the challenge getting into mining it, you're mining it remotely. May as well be on the moon. You're not getting into that hot cell. You have to figure out how to extract those isotopes remotely in a hot cell environment. So you have reactors coming in, and then you're going to have in your state co-located using nuclear fuel, safely secured, stored, yes. But what are you going to do with that material? So we want to be the answer, not only to do it in a win-win-win, extract the commodities, create an economic value from those commodities, and at the same time reduce that amount of high-level radioactive material that would otherwise be sitting next to the reactor down to about 3 to 4%. Suddenly you have completely different options, potentially much more achievable too. If you only have 3 to 4%, as indicated, you have one option, the leading option is boreholes. Now I've been speaking to several states, more than several, and they're looking at the opportunity as well. And they want options. And options are really important in nuclear. So if you are thinking about hosting a recycling facility, you may want to have the option of whether or not to keep that remaining material, put it in a borehole, and then say, I want that access. I want the nuclear waste fund. That's what the nuclear waste fund was raised for, was to pay for this disposal. So this is the type of dialogue happening right now. Now, this is our partnership thus far. It's not a comprehensive list, but you can see we have partners across the whole spectrum. We actually have a partnership with the second largest nuclear consortia in the country, Utility Services Alliance, expressly for the purpose of recycling the slightly used nuclear fuel that's sitting on the pads next to the reactors, and then selling them back the fuel, the uranium, at a significant market discount. We project well over 20% less than the price of uranium-based fuel, because we're not paying for mining, we're not paying for conversion. So I'll end with state of play in Washington. Some of you may know or not that the Department of Energy, in response to the Trump administration, in response to the executive orders on recycling, in particular, looking at rebuilding our our complete fuel cycle in the back end as well. They are now trying to get in a position to communicate formally to states to see what states may be interested in potentially hosting a national recycling center. Now, best of my knowledge, what I'm hearing now is that their options are looking at perhaps 1, 2, or 3, maybe a national tech hubs with significant federal resources flowing in to whatever state wants to be the solution for the nuclear, the nuclear waste dilemma, which we've had in the past. And we have this unique opportunity where this administration wants to actually act and build. And that's the priority. We're well positioned with the administration right now, proudly, in partnering with them, that we as a company, we are, as indicated, we're talking to states right now about partnering, working with them to explore the option of potentially deploying and hosting a national scale recycling facility with the jobs benefit, with the economics, et cetera, the right state that can see this through from a legislative, governor policies, county level, community use. All those are key ingredients to having the right atmosphere or the right conditions, ecosystem to successfully deploy a $6, $7 to $10 billion facility with a much larger tech corridor to follow. So I think I've done a little long. Madam Secretary, but happy to answer any questions.
Not a question, just a statement. I think, with Banco's announcement of their energy park here in Indiana, they do definitely want to include this recycling technology at their energy park. So it's a statement. This is something that's really encouraged about. So
that's good to hear. That's good to hear. I think it's interesting. I took over this company 4 years ago. When I took it over, even though I worked nuclear for much of my career, very familiar and helped lead the direct disposal for Yucca and then efforts under Bush, for example, for recycling. There's never been a time, like even in the past just year, where recycling has now become so common of a key element seen as part of the next generation of our fuel cycle in our nuclear sector. And I think that communities are starting to understand what this means. We're seeing it across the board in Congress. When Governor Braun was Senator Braun, I had the privilege with the founders of my company to develop a great relationship with them. And we were so impressed that even though we didn't have any nuclear reactors in the state, he took the time and cared about what we were doing. He spent personal time with us, hearing updates on where we are as a company to bring recycling to this country. And I greatly appreciated it. And him offering his CEO experience to me is greatly appreciated. And Senator Jim Banks is a fantastic champion of recycling as well, and we appreciate that. Indiana is in a key position geographically too. Infrastructure, waterways, rail. You've got the workforce. I can tell you, my VPs that are going to be the leads for this tell me that, I just spoke to one today getting a report this morning, Indiana is in a great position to be a leader in the full fuel cycle for nuclear in this country.
I have a kind of question and point of discussion, I guess. I think that this all makes so much sense and it's obviously very necessary for the country. The biggest challenge is a perceptional challenge. And I'm wondering, I think some of the things we've talked about, having like the NNSA as part of it, lends some comfort level, I think would be lending some comfort level to citizens. Locating it at a military installation would be something that I think would make people feel more comfortable. But what else can you address for people to say, if they have questions about putting that material in the ground. I mean, even here, we've had a lot of pushback from local communities about carbon storage. People get nervous that carbon storage may affect their water supply, affect the aquifers underground, may cause earthquakes, things like that. How do you respond to those kinds of security concerns?
Well, I mean, first of all, looking at the history of the nuclear sector and the robustness that we have built in and legally required for storage, for casks, for disposal, I would, suggest that there's no other energy sector that has more of a robust safety built in. These casks that transport the nuclear fuel, they use nuclear fuel. They are incredibly robustly engineered to endure any type of accident scenario. And there's been a huge amount of data developed for disposal. In fact, we already dispose. We have RIP. We have others. But I think at the end of the day, it's communication and information sharing, and not just one way. So I think community advisory boards, community engagement. My philosophy and Curio, especially when it comes to the nuclear waste issue, in trying to impart reality, the facts, as opposed to what you've heard or seen, Simpsons, whatever, and the real opportunity with the new technologies where it doesn't have to be a Faustian bargain. It could be a win-win-win, and we have thought of all of these things. Engage early, engage often with the communities. Oftentimes when I was in Washington, D.C., even out of good intent, we'd say, absolutely that. We're going to engage early and often with X state that we're working with. But then we fall in this trap of saying, oh, but first we need to get Commerce on board. First we need to get state. Oh, now we need to do this. Next thing you know, a year goes by, and it's the worst kept secret, and the community's already hearing, and all they know is they haven't been told that. So it's really important to place it as a priority, in my humble opinion. Engaging, information sharing, and giving the communities an opportunity to feel like that they actually have some degree of ownership, even if it is ownership of I have a right to know, I have questions, and receive them. I think that's probably one of the most important aspects.
Thank you very much. Other questions, comments? I'll open it up to the online participants. Any questions from online or our audience here?
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Just one comment, maybe, or observation. I've heard us talk and heard others talk about the nuclear waste problem. It seems to me that there's not really a waste problem in that we have found the ways to store it incredibly securely, albeit at the current locations where the nuclear generation resides. But I think by hearing things called Yucca Mountain, people get the perception that there are mountains and mountains of this waste. We know how to store it securely. What we're really talking about is making more efficient use, this whole mining concept of the additional fuel that's already there. So we know how to store the waste securely. What we're talking about is taking more value out of that, making more use of the resources that we have. And we'll be able to store what's left over securely as well. Maybe I would ask you, Ed, is that your perception as well? It's not so much a waste problem. It's the problem that we haven't made efficient use of all of the fuel that's available to us.
I completely and wholeheartedly agree with you. And so I think I always try to take care when I say the quote nuclear waste problem, and that is the perceived. And the perception, unfortunately, can be reality. If they believe that, that's why information sharing is so important. We have a really compelling story and set of facts to provide, but we still have 11 states in this country that have statewide moratoria or limitations on nuclear. And most of them, if you look at the legislation, it's at least in part tied to the so-called concern over nuclear waste. So communication is so key, and we have done an incredible job, not only in the civilian sector, but when you think about the largest fleet of reactors that roam our seas, been doing it for decades, called our nuclear navy, in harm's way, and has never had a major safety accident. And then you look at the world-class, the highest standard of safety of any nuclear fleet in the world is right here in the United States. So I agree with you completely. That's why I get back to Secretary Jaworowski saying that communication early and often, and it doesn't mean it's okay to hear opposing views. It's okay to hear views even if they are not convinced, even after we give it. But getting out there and having that information sharing is a lot better than having them rely on it by getting on just YouTube or watching some old movie that has characterized nuclear in a way that really doesn't have much in the way of reality based to it.
Yes, Andrew.
Can I
Yeah,
add
just-
Yes, please
I'm
go right
sorry,
ahead.
we have, so I also want to, piggybacking on that, I think too, educating in what other countries are doing. This isn't new technology. This is very well established. You know, we have companies like Framatome in France doing it. I know, speaking from First American Nuclear, our founders were part of FMEF, where this technology was largely developed back in the 80s. So it's not new. And I think adding that piece to the education helps, the power of proven. And we have a lot of experts. I personally we want to offer up Dr. James Conca to the state with any educational pieces that they might need on that. He was the state representative for the WIP site in New Mexico. So there's I think all of us working together that are in this, this interest of the fuel recycling, also showing that there is enough quote unquote waste to create fuel that would power all of the country for 100 years. I mean, that's huge. That's huge. And I think just, creating that narrative of how positive this really is and just alleviating the fear. If we all work together on it, I think I don't think it'll be too much of an issue.
Thank you so much. Andrew?
Yeah, I was just gonna so thank you for the presentation. I always come back to workforce, when we're talking about, nuclear renaissance, decades, the generations of workers. How do we as a industry ignite, pardon the pun, but ignite that passion and that spark in kids today? I've got young kids. How do we do that to ensure that we have a robust, world-class talent pipeline that's going to be able to sustain the demand? Because, like you said, thousands and thousands of jobs. How do we make sure that we're adequately skilled by volume to address it?
Indeed, it's a multi-pronged approach. I can at least first speak from my experience with my company. I am just about the oldest guy there, and majority of our engineers are in their 20s, some right out of college. Some of them work for well-established companies and felt like they were a cog in the system, and they wanted to have impact, and they saw what we were doing. And I think it's safe to say that they were inspired. They saw, they could really connect the dots to say, wow, if this works, it's not just the completion of a project. This could be historic. This could be generational. This could solve something others have not in generations been able to do. And then they get frontline work, at least speaking from startup. But in addition, from our company's perspective, we think partnering with and investing in universities, particularly in that state ecosystem, is going to be very important. And we certainly have that as part of our plan wherever we build our recycling facility, we're going to take a strong, hard look at the possibility of building our advanced small modular reactor that's going to be fueled by our recycled fuel, building the initial research and test reactor at one of the universities in that state, bringing in the other community colleges, engaging high school, and really setting up a in-state workforce pipeline all the way up to certified reactor operators, because you will have that common design test and research reactor at the university in that state. I think that gets young people going too.
It's not just, I'll just add to that. It's not just that, it's the skills workers, the skilled trade workers as well, because they often, as your slides show, make more money than the folks that went to university, right? Mm-hmm. And they have great careers at these plants. My husband worked as an operator at Palisades for a long time, and he made more money than I did as a nuclear engineer at the other nuclear power plant. So it's like, it just educating kids that maybe don't test well, college is not for them. They can do other things and still have make a great living, have a family, all those things.
Absolutely, and there's some very creative ways to go about it. I was at Speaker Johnson's retreat in Jackson Hole, and he brought in a special guest, and that was Alex Hart of that advanced step company, Palantir. And he said that they're also coming up with innovative ways for individuals who may not want or plan to go to college, but give them a pathway still to come in and get an educational pathway through the company. It's not just a one size fits all. And at the end of the day, what I like is the fact that our company can bring a mix and benefit the broad spectrum of individuals in the communities, from trades-based to advanced degrees. But I would like to see individuals that put that much time to get an advanced degree to get appropriately compensated. And I think that's important. And we go through a lot of effort to compensate the advanced degrees substantially, but not just through salary, although ours are competitive, definitely with market, but with ownership in the company. And that's the game changer. You hitch a ride with a company that is going on an exponential growth. You be a part of the original team of Microsoft or Google. And that's what we aim. We want to be the next SpaceX of nuclear.
Good. I'll just make one last comment, and I think that this technology application has roots and channels in a lot of different places. The governor also has an executive order on rare earth element recovery and critical material usage, focused a lot on recovering elements from former coal sites, but also anything that we can do in the state of Indiana to help develop materials domestically, instead of having to rely on adversaries to supply our rare earth elements that are needed in our phones and everything else. And so Curio obviously has a ability to help us in doing that too. So we might be able to invite you to come to see our rare earth elements task force as well.
Happy to do so. And just as a little footnote, the founders of my company were originally lead investors and founders of rare earth and critical mineral extraction companies. And it was that experience that led them to concluding that they want to also make a difference in the back end of the nuclear fuel cycle.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ed.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, our next speaker is Becca from Energy Systems Network. Thanks, Becca. Also want to welcome Paul Mitchell, CEO of ASN here. Thanks for being here, Paul.
Great. Okay, thanks. Nice to see you all. I'm Becca Gillespie from Energy Systems Network. We are a 15-year-old nonprofit, works in the public-private interface, and led by Paul Mitchell, who joined us just now. Today I'll be talking about a project we worked on together with the IOED on advanced nuclear project financing. This is a little background on how this project got started. Today, I'll just be giving a really brief overview of the paper. If you want to read all the nitty-gritty details, it's available online, and I'll share that link with you all at the end. But basically, it was to explore what are the financing options for advanced nuclear projects. So we've heard a lot today about the jobs that can come from fuel recycling. I know we have two representatives here from the jobs who probably are touting the jobs that can come from the supply chain opportunities in nuclear space. But you would really be remiss as a state. We would be remiss to miss out on the economic impacts and opportunities that come from building the projects themselves. Actually having the nuclear power plants should not be overlooked. Only 12% of the costs are the reactors, and such a small percentage of the costs are fuel in the long run that it's really the workforce that keeps the nuclear power plant. That is the engine of a nuclear power plant and the end of the nuclear industry. So I applaud you all for agreeing to look at this important aspect of nuclear power. The approach of discovering what's going on in the world of finance, I would not pretend that you will read this report and suddenly understand how to finance your next nuclear power plant. I wish I could say that it was just that simple. All I had to do was read a few textbooks, summarize what was relevant to Indiana, and give you an answer. Unfortunately, that is not what the report is about. I basically, worked with some scant literature, mostly what comes out of the Loan Program Office, now known as the Energy Dominance Financing Office, EDF. Is one of the real major resources of a lot of what I used. But there's really not a lot of literature there. So I interviewed stakeholders. I leveraged how many of you know me through C2N+AI, our consortium trying to bring nuclear power to the state. I leveraged some of the relationships there. Those industry stakeholders worked with industry groups that are also looking at nuclear financing, including the Nuclear Scaling Initiative, GAIN at INL, Purdue, Ronaldo right there, and Roland Berger, and tried to summarize what's out there in the world. But again, and attended some of these events and webinars that were available. But again, there is no right answer today, and you won't read the report and have all the answers. But it's starting to coalesce, and people are starting to understand how we might finance these new nuclear projects. So I'll just be reporting back on what I've learned. Again, today, what is the meaning of being financeable? These are kind of the topic areas I cover in the report at a really high level. Number one, you don't get financing unless you have a strong industry. And the demand is what all the bankers, all the industry stakeholders I spoke to, there wasn't a conversation I had or an event I attended that didn't scream back that there's momentum because people are demanding energy and people are demanding clean energy or zero carbon energy or reliable energy, one or more of those. I can quote some numbers, of course, 2% annual growth rate for the load in this state. AEP or Indiana Michigan Power would probably differ on that, saying they're looking to double in the next few years, but it's there, and that is what's driving a lot of this. Without that, I don't know how strong this whole industry would be. Next, I talk through the business case. Again, I won't be going through each and every aspect of that here today, but you can't have an industry that's financeable unless your costs and your revenues justify profits. So there is a business case to be spoken for, and that is what makes this all financeable. The key one that everyone's a little bit hung up on is the risk manageable. So that's where we're at right now, trying to get over the hurdle of the risk of that cost overrun being manageable. And then, of course, all financiers always like policy stability, and a lot of policy support in the financing space is what's making it financeable and helping us overcome those risk barriers. Again, industry momentum is strong. It's kind of a big high-level takeaway here. I think I'm just probably preaching to the choir if I go in too long about industry momentum being strong. You've heard the stats. You just read, Jet did a lovely report. A lot of what was in there is about how strong that the market is right now. And I don't have to repeat the load statistics we've all been hearing, but this number is really interesting. To me, the restart nuclear PPAs are not public information, but there's a lot of analysis on what they might have been signed for. And it looks like these various restart PPAs, so that's the Constellation deal, the Meta, and all these things, were around $77 to $110 per megawatt hour. So expensive. And then we see these financing signals that people like to point to and talk about a lot. One is that there's a lot of investments in the startup companies, the nuclear startups. 2.3 billion was invested in nuclear reactor startups in the last 3 years. These are people with some sort of at least a pre-application in front of the NRC, compared with relatively zero in the years before that. And then the formation of these various developer companies, so companies that want to develop nuclear power plants. Those numbers are not as clean and easy to pull out, but there's heavy investment in there as well. But yeah, I guess, or like, what does this map have to do with it? Nothing shows the momentum more. This is the, these might be the leading KPIs. This is the lagging KPI right here. The dots on the map are the lagging KPI that tell us that there's momentum in this industry. People are announcing projects, deals are being made, and things are starting to shape up. All of these are none of them have really gotten to commercial operation yet, except for Vogtle, of course. But those dots in that dashboard, the existence of that dashboard, even NEI having a dashboard and needing to have a dashboard instead of a bulleted list with 3 projects on it, is in of itself a KPI that there's momentum in this place. I won't go into this. Jet did a great job, but I think for the purposes of financing, I will just state that the main government support for financing new nuclear is that what used to be Title 1703 under the Loan Program Office now is rolled up into Title 1706 under the same people. Now it's called the Energy Dominance Fund Office. And that is going strong, and they're still promising to lend at up to 80% of the debt financing for new nuclear projects at a very low interest rate of probably roughly, in what I use in the report, 5%. So it's the Treasury bond rate plus these different spreads and whatnot. It comes out to 5%. That's not a rate you're going to get when you're doing new technology and you're going out to the market. So that is really critical to making these things financeable. The investment tax credits stayed strong through OBA. So I think Jet maybe mentioned that. Not all the technologies had the same experience from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, but they did stay strong for nuclear, and at least through a construction start date of 2033, you can get up to 50% of an investment tax credit, and the 30% probably seems, so it's a 30 to 50% tax credit. 30% is sort of your basic, I follow the rules of this program, which include prevailing wage and some various things. 40, you can get a 10% adder for locating in a energy community. There's a few of those in Indiana, so that I think is something that people should really try hard to pursue. It's anywhere near a coal plant that's recently been closed or a coal mine that's recently been closed. And then the next adder is for being, is another 10% to get you up to 50% for being more than 55% manufactured domestically. And it is not easy to get this answer. I can't say for certain, but it seems like all nuclear projects are going to meet that. I can't say 100% for certain. Of course, he also mentioned the executive orders, but what did the financiers care about? What do they keep bringing up? They keep bringing up that NRC reform and getting licensing down to 18 months makes them sleep better at night and actually start thinking about investing in nuclear. And then obviously Jet did a great summary of the Indiana State support for site development, which I won't repeat. So, okay, so great. There's momentum. There's government momentum. There's industry momentum. What's the business case? Does this pencil? Because you can't really take momentum to the bank. The answer is maybe it pencils. The answer is we hope it pencils. The answer is the business case appears to be compelling. Here is Kohl's. These are using Lazard does a annual report on the levelized cost of energy. And so because plain old wind and solar beat everyone like crazy, but also it's not realistic because they show up whenever the wind is blowing and the sun is shining. I left those ones off. I put wind plus storage and solar plus storage, which is a 4-hour battery with them. Coal unsubsidized and gas combined cycle unsubsidized. I left these two unsubsidized as well because post 2026, because of OBA or OB3, however we're pronouncing that these days, they won't have subsidies. The ITC will be gone for those. And I compared it with advanced nuclear that includes the ITC and the energy dominance funding. And yes, using some of the higher cost estimates and the lowest ITC, not looking so hot, but there's quite a few people that believe that you can get to prices and overnight capital costs and ITCs that will make you very competitive with these other technologies. And again, I just showed you here that nuclear restart PPA and where that fell. So, you know, you could take this to the bank, I suppose, but you know, it's the risk. Ultimately it's the risk that keep people up at night. And so, just a little bit more on that. I think one of the most kind of succinct ways I've heard from the financing industry about their feelings around financing new nuclear was at the Atlantic Council conference in September of this year. And there was, 5 bank executives up on the stage on the first day of that conference talking about these momentum signals, 2.3 billion invested in the startups, excitedly, proclaiming the feeling they got around new nuclear. And then at the end of each of that panel, they each said something that more or less said what this person says, which is, are there nuclear projects that are investable for my mandate yet? The answer is no. Hopefully soon. That's kind of the key question. That's Morgan Stanley. Up on the stage was also Bank of America, JP Morgan. It's simply not commercially financeable at this stage. I think I won't go into all the reasons, but I think most of us know that these projects have not really begun construction. Most have not received their construction license yet. There is a couple out there that are just about to or just have. And almost none have operational licenses with the exception of Vogtle, which was a lot over schedule and over budget. And then the next day, there was another panel with Guggenheim is the quote I use here, but he was sitting next to Julie Kozarowski from the LPO, which at the time was the LPO and is now called the EDF, and basically said, big banks are not relevant, call me, call them. And so that's where we're at right now. That kind of is a summary of the state of affairs in nuclear financing. I think the other way that people are going to get new nuclear finance is creativity. So you better use the government-backed debt. You better use your 50% ITC, or I hope you can find a way everyone can find a way to use that 50% ITC or at least 40% ITC. But people are trying to get really creative with that equity stack and how they can find those partners to make a good equity stack. Of course, the traditional utility, top of the list, still a great way to finance new nuclear, and the House bills in Indiana make that really feasible for them to help them get started. But yeah, over the last 20 years, renewables have taken a tact that is quite different from using utility financing, and you have used private financing, and those same players are out there making a lot of noise, having a lot of discussions, and starting to get pretty serious about investing in new nuclear. And so those large publicly traded developers, Constellation, NextEra, Vistra, all have a seat at the table and are all potentially really big companies that might lead some of these first projects. Then there's all these startup developers. Again, I have a whole list in the chart in the back of the report. I won't go into them, but you may have met some of them, Elemental, even some of these technology developers that bring their own financing that want to go straight from turnkey, essentially. And those are all out there trying to develop as well and be the lead of these projects as well. And then there may be a consortium of multiple entities. And then come in the minority shareholders. And that's where, again, creativity is key here. Nobody wants, it seems like, oh, this little old equity, that is just too much money for anyone to take the risk on at this phase. It doesn't look that big on this big old chart, but it is a lot of money and people are having a hard time coming up with it. And so creativity is really whatever is the name of the game right now. How can we get a bunch of people to join in? And who better to join in but the people that are going to vertically integrate you? So the off-taker, hey, Google, you have a big balance sheet. Can you take money and give it to us and be part of the equity stack? Hey, EPC partners, you are 88% of the cost of building this. So it will be really wise to include an EPC partner in the equity stack if possible. Other strategic investors, people interested in new nuclear, and even and they don't tend to be as rich, but the technology developers. Sorry, you guys are really rich. Right, but they don't tend to be as likely to come in, but there has been discussion about technology developers coming in and sharing a part of the equity stack. Some of them are more startup-y. Obviously, Rolls-Royce is not. So yeah, I think, like I said, the key to project financing, it can be solved anywhere. It can be solved in Indiana. It is possible. Not being first of a kind makes the risks go down and down and down. We see that with the restarts. The restarts were really risky for Palisades, and everyone was not sure if it was going to work. And now they're acting like we've been doing this for years. We know how to restart nuclear power. It's old hat. So, and restarting them all over the country. So this is the sort of thing. It's difficult to be first of a kind. Nobody wants to jump first. But when you do, and if you jump first or even early, because they take a while to build, there's a lot of recommendations out there of how you might do that. I just talked through all the ways you can partner creatively. And I kind of highlighted a little bit bolder the ones where the state might play a role. So, making the equity stack, the state ultimately won't have a lot to say into how that equity stack is formed, but helping facilitate cross-project collaboration through what you're all doing at NASIO and other work with maybe the Nuclear Scaling Initiative and forming that buyers club, those are areas where the state can really make an impact. Leveraging public partnerships, yeah, every project should be leveraging the Loan Program Office. Oops, that's that should be EDF. ITC, any state funding available. But what can the state be doing? Well, they can be making sure that that policy is stable and helping to lobby for these policies to continue at the federal level and keeping it stable for those investments because they're going to take a long time to come to fruition. Avoiding risk where possible. A lot of states are taking a bigger role in site selection, helping figure out where the communities are that are low risk, where's there's low technical risk, where's there low commercial risk. I guess I have somewhat of a conflict of interest there because we are interested in that as well in C2N plus AI. But this is where we see Kentucky, Texas, Utah playing a role with their sort of preliminary siting grants. And EPC selection, I highlighted that really the government, the state government doesn't have a ton of say in that, but the EPC, a well-run and experienced and reputable EPC is the key to pretty much the rest of this chart here. And so as much oversight as the state can or wants to have, that would be the way to make sure the rest of this chart is filled out. But there's a lot to do. There was learnings from Vogtle. I kind of put those here in the best practices. Stage-gated decision-making, that's something that any good investor will know about and care about. And then fixed price and target price contracts. Those are ways that you make sure that your vendors are bought in. So this is just a repeat of that in a list form. But that's pretty much it. It's at a very high level. Of course, there's a lot more information in the paper, and I'm open for questions either now or in the future. And I showed a link here.
Thank you very much. Nice job, Becca. Questions, comments? Becca, did you in your studies and conversations, how much about the private-public partnerships did anything come through, like partnering with data centers, partnering with large load entities that can help kind of share the cost?
You know, I think data centers are sort of the cash cow in the room, right? Everybody's looking to them to be a part of that equity stack and be more than just, I guess, you know, I put here like an off-taker de-risking. If you're building a solar project, you want to make sure you have a reputable off-taker.
Right.
That's almost like, you better have that if you want to build a nuclear power plant.
Yes.
If you can get them to step in an equity stake, that's what everybody wants. There's a lot of discussion about it. I don't know that they've actually done that I mean, they go all the way around and invest in these startups. As you know, Microsoft is invested in TerraPower and Google and Kairos. And so they go all the way around, like, hey, I'm going to give you a really good chance at being successful, and I want the upside. So I better have some investment, you know? So they do go all the way back around, but in terms of actually equity stake in the project themselves, there's a lot of talk about it. And I think actually a really great report that you may have seen from Chris Lahese at INL Gain shows how they're really the best suited to do this. And yet I don't think it's actually happened or come to fruition yet.
The only thing I would add is we did hear some more about signing prospective PPAs that involve potentially a parent guarantee, which then unlocks a private equity firm taking the equity stake. It's not them necessarily taking a full equity stake as Google or as AWS, but it's putting something in the offtake commitment that if you get to this point, we will buy your power for 30 years at X strike price.
Interesting.
That said, that still is not the same thing as coming in at the equity, because it doesn't get you past the early development capital stage, which is usually what that equity is needed for, is that early stuff before you're billing it all to it's not the loan program office, the
EDF,
yeah.
Energy
Dominance Fund. I like that name, but it's true that's what that is built for, the loan program office or the energy dominance, where the banks, it's too early stage or it's too risky and commercial banks don't fund it. So that's where the government steps in naturally to do that.
It's right where it needs to be. I mean, I just wish that people could get over this little hurdle here.
But there is
And
that
it's
gap.
big.
There's that gap.
It is still difficult.
And a lot of that,
Yeah.
and the part of that gaps that's maybe the trickiest is the first 100 million of it, which is, you know, the order of those dollars being spent is more at the bottom first, and then it gets, then in theory it gets easier. So if those offtake arrangements are predicated on you bringing the power to them in the future, can be quite helpful, but it's not the same. The other thing that maybe we're seeing a little bit of, I don't know whether we put it into the report or not, is in some cases, there may be a bridge generation resource component to the agreement. So you say, okay, data center signs a long-term offtake and is immediately transacting based on a coal unit, maybe gas, so let's say a coal unit for the next however many years. And then there's an option to flip it to nuclear once that construction process starts. Then that site and that development at least has the revenue coming from the existing PPA for the coal power, and they can at least get the data center up and going. That's another element to it. But for sure, getting the AI companies into the cap table, either directly or indirectly through some private equity that's backing them, is critical.
And
yeah, just from my perspective, from my company's perspective, is a lot has changed in a year, certainly since Guggenheim's quote in 2024. I can't tell you what they would say right now, but at least from my perspective, a year ago, we were pitching banks. Today, banks are pitching us, not just for leading our equity rounds, but wanting to be that project finance partner long-term. And if we want to go exit, that too. Multiples. And they're hearing about their fellow banks seeking that. And it's been a sea change. That doesn't mean that it's easy to go to term sheet and then to proceed from there. We intentionally avoided taking on debt at this time. But I think there are many things that are not directly having to do with finance that directly impact the ability to finance. Obviously, offtakes, they want to see as much about ironclad agreements for those offtakes, recognizing you may not always have that. Maybe it's an intent. In my humble opinion, what is very important for them to see that we're scaling up and de-risking the tech. So we deliberately avoided going from paper design to full commercial. And so we tried to take that SpaceX approach by engineering, learning by design, and scaling up to de-risk it. But state partnering, the banks are sophisticated enough to understand that your facility is going to, your ability to deploy, it's going to also depend on the state policies, the state acceptance, the support. So it's important to the banks, at least what I'm seeing, to them to see things like, even if it is an MOU with the state, for example, where there's active, open acknowledgement of an industry and government exploring, for example.
Yeah.
Those things reduce the risks, even if it's first of a kind. But I think some of these banks want so much to be a part of that next Google, the next SpaceX. And they want to be a part of it, and they long-term partner. And I have not heard that from them until this past year, at least our experience.
That's great news. Very good.
They're excited, and yet there is, I don't think that Indiana's behind at all in getting deals made. I think that everybody's made a lot of progress or wants to know which sites are going to be real, know which policies are going to be stable. I think people trust what's going on here with the policy, the three policy or four bills passed. And then they want, and they're making a lot of announcements, but I think an announcement here could catch up to those ones pretty quickly. It's not always as much money behind those dots as there should be at this moment.
And I think there's some things working in favor of not only creative finance, but just turning nuclear finance opportunities into something that's commercialized, that you can do every day. And in the private equity world, fund world, two things need to occur. You need a defendable or acceptable yield on any equity being put into a project, and you need a defined exit. When am I going to get my money back? Now, the issue that I think the industry is going through right now is licensed design. They're trying to get licenses issued for these new advanced designs. That takes a lot of time, but that's also the big piece of uncertainty. Because if you're going to pre-fund something, you don't have absolute clarity on when you're going to get a license to then go construct, and you can't really back into a completion date, and you can't back into when that asset would either cash flow or be sold at a value to create a yield or some type of safe harbor for the money coming back into your pocket. So I think once a few of these designs get licensed in the United States, then you're really just looking at the construction project, how much and how long. And that's an easier pill to swallow than having to deal with getting licensed first, then construct, then commission to produce power. So I think we're more or less 12 to maybe 24 months away from getting some clarity on license design. And then moving forward, I think it's really just about managing construction expectations. And quite frankly, most of these reactor companies are looking at improved constructability, speed to construct, speed to erect. So, the last 2 units that were built, 3 and 4 at Vogel, they were built in a different environment, and they didn't take into consideration as much as they should the constructability and the total cost of the programs. They just really wanted to get those units up and running. And so I think that the mindset of the industry at this point is really putting its eggs in the right basket as it relates to constructability and cost and efficiencies, and really creating a commercialized industry in the United States for reactor deployment. We've always done one-offs. We haven't done consistent builds, with exception to 1968 through 1984, where we were delivering on average of about 4.5 gigawatts into the United States in nuclear power, with the most ever delivered in the United States, which is about 10 gigawatts in a year. Now, that's a commercial industry, but after 85, 86, it kind of tailed off, and now we don't have a commercial nuclear industry anymore. So we need to get back up to that point where we can get comfortable with financing the assets correctly and building them efficiently. So with all that being said, I think that Becca's report was great, and it gives people a different way to look at financing nuclear, more from the commercial side of the equation, because our competitors like China and Russia are all state funded, they're state run, state operated. It's a totally different model. And I think once again, the United States needs to take it back. Most, if not all, of the nuclear technology on energy production is ours anyways, in some form or shape. And we need to just use the entrepreneurial mindset to get back into the process of doing this on a regular basis. And ultimately, we're almost there. And as it relates to the state's interaction or the federal government's interaction, I think that EDF is it's given everyone good opportunities to get, I would consider it a subsidized opportunity or some offsets to create some profit when you're building nuclear. But it's not a long-term solution. We need to use our markets and our ingenuity and frankly, just the amassed amount of dry powder in the marketplace that's focused on investing in the United States. We need to put that to work towards nuclear. And as it relates to the state of Indiana, I think there's some good opportunity for the state to take care of its own, to look at investing in infrastructure on a short and long-term basis, because it's good for the state. If you have a solid infrastructure, whether that's rail, nuclear, roadways, you generally have a better quality of life in the state. You create jobs, and the long-term outlook of people wanting to live here is better. So there's a few things that I think the state can do. One is probably put together an investment opportunity for its own infrastructure alongside industry. And I think that would lead to good signaling to the market and to others that Indiana is a serious place to live, and it's a serious place to invest, and a great place to stay and grow long term. Number two, I think Indiana can at least acknowledge, and they're doing this right now through tax incentives and other offsets, to just continue to promote itself and why you'd want to live and grow here and also get educated and just enjoy Indiana for what it is. So, sending those signals to the market, not only the businesses, but individuals, that Indiana cares about its infrastructure and its people. It's not only a mindset, it's just something that I think at this point in the market needs to happen to make and keep Indiana competitive. So what I would like to say about this.
I mean, notice that I think one of the big differences with, the solar and renewable world, it took this original private financing model, is frankly this time scale. How long it takes, how early you're putting in tens of millions of dollars when you really don't know the end of what's going to happen in year 8. And that's where, again, there's all these things, the risk and the first of the kind and the design, and a really good EPC firm that's actually executing really nicely and well and following all the best practices is good. But from the state's perspective, it's where that policy stability becomes really important. And community acceptance becomes important as well. You might say, okay, this Senate bill makes it that we can build in this coal site and it's law, but it really doesn't matter. 8 years is a long time. We don't know what's going to happen to the law. Nobody knows. You have to actually have community acceptance just for the sake of having community acceptance, because it's just such a long time that if you don't, someone's going to fight and you end up changing the laws and all these things. So policy stability is really important when you have this huge timeline. It's not weighted towards the front, it's weighted towards the back, but has hundreds of millions early in the process that are being put up by developers. Mind you, these early costs are all equity. The loan program office isn't engaged until here. So you're putting up hundreds of millions at risk. You want to know that 8 years from now, those laws won't change. The community won't suddenly stop, not accept you. And that's where kind of getting that early sighting and that ability to find, help them de-risk the project is important. Again, even in an anarchy, you want to have community acceptance, right? Ultimately, it will make it easier for a build and an operations of a power plant.
One additional note, as a large off-taker, we have to be careful about investing in specific projects for fear that it'll trigger us as becoming a utility. And then there's regulatory issues associated with that as a publicly traded company. So that's something that we talk about pretty regularly is, we're fully invested in the PPA portion, but becoming in as an equity owner is not likely to happen for fear of triggering that component.
Does anyone know if they addressed that specific issue and others I think it's PERC 1920 that's out there in the litigation, any of those issues?
I think that it really depends on the level of participation and the type of participation.
Yeah, I'm sure there's
I don't
thresholds
believe that
there.
I don't believe you're going to trigger it if you're part of an investment consortium that is, minority, you're not controlling.
If you're an investor on the technology, if you're an investor on an actual location site, I think that's where you start to get into the gray area.
That might be something the state might want to look into from a policy standpoint. Because I don't know, obviously we all kind of understand the historical context of the sort of regulated utilities versus an individual company, but if it's a financing of generation for which they're an off-taker.
How is it different than the joint venture structures that a lot of the renewable projects are under though? Because those have invest equity partners.
Good question.
I would ask that too. I guess
there's different types.
There's using a special purpose vehicle. I guess when I
there's
said
a special purpose vehicle, typically there's an exit strategy, which is usually there's a short-term life to it where they're getting out. So it's not a long-term partnership. But a lot of the renewable projects, they have off-takers. They don't have industrials partnering
To your,
in the ownership.
your point is, I'm going to give a hypothetical. You got somebody like, I don't know, chip manufacturer that is going to come and they're going to need a certain amount of power.
Right.
And they may even be willing to be an equity participant in a unit that is still operated or is part of the IOU that serves them.
Right.
Can they actually participate as an equity participant in that site?
Is
And
it-
if that's not allowable, is that something that could be looked
Yeah, I mean, we're going all the way up to SEC rules and regulations and classifications of the entity at the SEC level.
Interesting.
So it's not necessarily a state level we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something important for us to think about in terms of policy, and as we move forward, large loads, how would you play in this industry?
Right. Yeah, which is why I think you haven't found a lot of the Googles and the Metas getting into the equity portion. You're hearing more PPAs.
I mean, there is a big world developing around being nuclear developers. The flavors of this ice cream store are immense, and I don't even have all the flavors on here because I guess recently I found out that Oklo. Oh, I didn't add Oklo, but Oklo is startup publicly traded, but also is kind of the turnkey. So it didn't even make the list. It didn't fall into any of the categories. So but the flavors of these developers are many, and they will ultimately probably be the people doing that first 100 million. There just is no way that anyone else can come in that early. And even if these end up being funded by someone or private equity, these are the people that you'll meet for those first few years, and we'll have to own the project until they get debt financing and possibly minority shareholders, maybe more vertically down to the vendors, then vertically up to the PPA holder. I don't know which way is up and down, frankly, but those are the two ways. That will all have to happen later. Sorry, I have like a minute. Oh, I just turned it off. I have like a bajillion slides in the appendix, so I'm probably gonna get lost here, but it doesn't happen in the very beginning of the project. In the beginning, these are the people that will be coming into the state and saying, I have that first 100 million, I'm here to do business. And hopefully creating something that's an asset that's got real value that will go and become a project. Nobody wants to spend 100 million
And Becca said this at the beginning, but this is also, the report attempts to strike a balance between also acknowledging that there remains a rate-based financing model for building nuclear. And it's also not impossible that you could have a combination of a traditional rate-based financing model and one of these more development models being combined. So what's not on that list that was just shown that says nuclear developer are, let's say, IOUs who say, I'm going to do nuclear, I'm going to bring it to the commission, I'm going to utilize rate-based financing, I'm going to get the federal benefits, I may go after, and we saw, congratulations to Indiana Michigan Power was in here, and I think Duke, although not for an Indiana project, that, are part of these $400 million grant awards. If the federal government does more of those types of grants, those are big pots of money that can be quite beneficial. They're non-dilutive capital that's coming into a project that's very much to try to close that early gap. And so that would just be another comment that when you hear us talking about financing, we're spending a decent amount of the time characterizing this kind of new model for financing, drawing from renewables, drawing from all the things that have happened in the 15 years, 20 years that we haven't been building these things, and then recognizing that you're stacking that side by side with a traditional model that is still in play, but also even our investor-owned utilities, I think, are some of the first to say that there's also a lot of challenges they're having when it comes to going to that rate base for new rates, even for long-term investments.
And one clarification too, just to kind of get back to your question, there's a difference between a generation and I'm going to consume the whole load. Nothing goes to the marketplace versus a nuclear facility that's far more than what I can consume any given time, and the rest of it can go out to the general public. So there's a deviation there as well.
And I think as a coalition, a committee, these are things that we need to be aware of as we start thinking down the line of our opportunities and our recommendations for the state, whether it has policy implications for large load users, policy implications for our utilities, but also looking at what other states are doing. You had Fermi on there with Westinghouse and that 4 gigawatt serving data centers, our old boss getting involved there. And, people are being really creative, and Texas has that $350 million state fund. And I'm watching very closely what other states are doing with putting their fund together and like you're saying, Ronaldo, to attract and build some infrastructure. Right now, we seem to be attracting the deployment and attracting some of the manufacturing without having the state put in its own funding. I think our 20% investment tax credit on the manufacturing side is getting a lot of attention, and that's very helpful. But I'm very aware and watching closely of what those other state banks are doing. And I'm also wondering about not just on the nuclear side, but also on that rare earth element side that's kind of coming back again and may be more apt to need that kind of state infrastructure money, because that side of it, the rare earth elements, geologists in that field of study is being eliminated across the country, and that needs funding from the states. And that's something that might need a state bank and state resources. But I'm feeling like at this point on the nuclear side of things, like we're moving along okay without having to use taxpayer dollars to attract that industry to come here. So that's at least my thought. I don't know how other people are feeling like that, but I do want us to watch closely how it's working in our competing states.
We didn't cover too much of that. Did we cover the different state programs?
Yeah, I think they're each listed.
I think you're right. I mean, I think that also probably one of those examples where being a follower versus a first mover might actually be the better way to do it, because do we even know yet what the participation or what the role of the state is or what's needed? We know siting and permitting, and so you've done it. We know creating some certainty around the role that the IOUs can play, which the state has provided that. We know the manufacturing aspect, which is provided. I do think another thing that got said earlier that we ought to think about, it's not direct tied to financing per se, but it's definitely a risk factor. And certainly it's a way to ensure that the greatest amount of the economic value is captured within the state is, as you heard before, do we have any EPCs in Indiana that can take on any of this work? I just left a meeting today with Gaylor Electric, right? That runs a pretty big operation in Indiana, and they're building modular systems for hyperscale data centers in their facility. And we're talking about, with new nuclear, a lot less will be built on site. Will there be more modular things built off site that can be done at a place like Gaylor? And so the workforce isn't just the individual workers, that's important, and the training of those workers, but have we positioned companies that are doing construction, engineering, design, and do we have the EPCs? Because Black and Veatch can't do every single project. Well, maybe they can, but do you have an EPC community that you can help stand up in the state? That will have an effect of lowering the cost potentially, because they're likely to want to do projects in their own state, and have the potential also of ensuring that a greater percentage of the overall spend on one of these projects, flows in and stays in the state.
So I think that's a good point, because we could even have a subcommittee on workforce development in and of itself for the industry. Mallory, can you make sure we have a note on that for our notes? Thank you. Anything else, Rebecca or Paul?
No, thank you very much.
Any other questions online, comments?
The report is out officially. We did a press release. Thank you for the quote. And
thank you.
If anybody has any questions at all, obviously Becca is the person to call and chat with. We're happy to do debriefs on the report, and it can be circulated as widely as possible.
Thank you, Becca, and thank you, ESN. Really appreciate it. Great, thank you. Okay, well, we have just about 5 minutes left in our time here. Any comments from our online participants? Okay. Any other questions or comments from those in the room?
Needs to be monthly going forward to
It
2022.
won't always be monthly. It may be more every other month kind of cadence. But it'll be probably more like every other month. Yeah. And we'll try to give you plenty of notice, especially with having our end of year reports. But I want to thank everybody for participating. Thank you so much to Ed McGinnis and Curio for coming out here. I'm sure you'll be back in the future. And thank you to Indiana Office of Energy Development and JET and team, John Forbes, for putting the report together. And we will go ahead and forward that on to the governor. Thank you everyone for coming and taking the time to be here. Have a safe and pleasant holiday season, and we will see you after the first of the year. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're not. They should all be following us, right?
So how long?
Yeah, totally.